Yes, we are. My home. I was gonna cry. I couldn't believe it. So yeah. So at first I gave up. I gave up for a long time. I didn't care. I didn't care about anything. I got involved with some bad people and some bad drugs, and I shouldn't have done. Lost all my teeth. Methamphetamines. I quit that now, thank God. And now that I want to get, I'm getting back into trying to get back into society, but I can't get back in. I just can't get back in.
Welcome back to Homeless Crisis News. New York is known as the city that never sleeps. For some people, that is not a slogan. It is survival. Above-ground office towers remain lit long after midnight. Restaurants close, delivery trucks arrive, and millions of people begin another morning. But below the city, some passengers ride the subway from one end of the line to the other. Not because they have somewhere to go, but because the train is the closest thing they have to a room. On the sidewalks, people guard everything they own inside plastic bags. Inside shelters and temporary rooms, families wait for a permanent address that may still be months away. More than 80,000 people have recently been counted inside New York City's main shelter system. Tens of thousands are children. But this story is not about one number. It is about one night with nowhere private to sit, nowhere safe to sleep, and no door that belongs to you. Tonight we follow the hidden New York beneath the lights, the subway riders, the families in temporary rooms, and the people sleeping only feet away from unimaginable wealth. Stay with us and subscribe if you believe these lives should not disappear from view. Because in the city that never sleeps, the darkest question may be this: what happens when a human being becomes invisible in one of the most crowded places on Earth? By morning, New York begins moving before the sun fully reaches the streets. Coffee shops open. Delivery trucks block narrow lanes. Office workers disappear into subway entrances, while tourists lift their phones toward buildings that seem to touch the sky. From a distance, the city looks unstoppable. But for someone without a home, New York moves differently. A subway station is not only a place to catch a train, it may be the only place with light warmth, security cameras, and other people nearby. A fast food restaurant is not only somewhere to eat, it may offer 10 quiet minutes indoors, a bathroom, or a place to charge a dying phone before an employee asks someone to leave. A library can become shelter from the weather. A hospital waiting room can become a place to sit without being exposed. A train moving through the night can become the closest thing to a locked door. The city offers thousands of spaces, but almost none of them truly belong to the person with nowhere else to go. Every public place comes with a clock. How long before someone notices? How long before security arrives? How long before the train reaches the final stop and everyone is told to get off? That uncertainty follows people through every hour. They carry bags because leaving belongings unattended may mean losing everything. Identification, medication, clothing, photographs, and the few objects connecting them to the life they had before can disappear in minutes. Rest becomes shallow. Even when the body stops moving, the mind stays alert. A sound nearby could mean danger. A police officer could mean displacement. Rain could destroy what little remains. One missed phone call could cost a shelter appointment, a job opportunity, or contact with family. Above them, New York continues selling the promise that anyone can begin again. Below that promise is another reality. Beginning again requires sleep. It requires privacy. It requires clean clothes and address transportation and enough stability to arrive somewhere at the right time. Without those things, even the smallest task becomes harder. The distance between homelessness and stability may look short on a map, but for the person carrying everything they own through the city, it can feel almost impossible to cross. And when night returns, the city changes again. The sidewalks grow quieter. The trains become less crowded. The places that felt public during the day begin to feel exposed. For someone without a home, night is not the end of the day. It is the part that must be survived. The first decision is where to go. A subway car may offer warmth, movement, and the safety of other passengers. But sleep too deeply and someone may steal a bag, a phone, or a pair of shoes. Stay too long and transit workers may wake everyone at the final stop. A station platform may feel safer than a doorway, but it also means bright lights, noise, cold benches, and the fear of being forced outside before morning. Some people search for a corner hidden from the wind. Others remain where cameras, police, or late-night businesses are nearby. Privacy can feel dangerous. Visibility can feel humiliating. Every choice carries a cost. A person may avoid a shelter because they fear theft, violence, credited rooms, strict rules, or being separated from a partner. Someone with a pet may refuse to leave the only companion still beside them. A person struggling with addiction may fear withdrawal. Someone living with untreated mental illness may no longer trust the systems offering help. From the outside, refusal can look irrational. From the street, it may feel like the least dangerous option. Then there is the body. Concrete pulls heat away during winter and holds it during summer. Shoes stay on because removing them creates another risk. Sleep comes in fragments. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, then another sudden awakening. A siren, footsteps, a hand reaching near a bag, a voice saying it is time to move. By sunrise, a person may have spent 8 hours searching for rest without ever truly sleeping. And morning does not bring recovery. It brings another list of problems. Where can they wash? Where can they use a bathroom without being turned away? Where can they charge a phone needed for a job, call a shelter placement, or contact with family? The city is filled with doors, but most of them require money, identification, permission, or an address. For the person standing outside, survival becomes a sequence of small negotiations. One more train ride, one more cup of coffee, one more place to sit, one more night without knowing where the next night will end. That is why the subway built to move New York can become the only place where the city allows someone to stop moving for a while. Underground, the temperature is different from the street. There is light, there are cameras, there are other passengers nearby. A person can sit without immediately being exposed to rain wind or the eyes of everyone passing above. That does not make the train safe. It only makes it less dangerous than the alternatives. A rider may choose a long route because it offers more time before reaching the final station. They may stay awake through several stops, then close their eyes only when the car feels quiet enough. Their belongings remain wrapped around an arm or pressed against the body. Shoes stay on. A coat becomes a blanket. A plastic bag becomes a pillow. Sleep is never complete. Every announcement can mean the end of the temporary shelter. Every station change brings new passengers, new attention, and a new chance of being told to move. Some riders complain about the smell. Others move to another car. A few offer food, water, or a quiet word. Most simply look away. For the person trying to rest, that silence can feel safer than confrontation. But it can also deepen the feeling of being erased. The subway creates a strange kind of invisibility. A person may ride beside hundreds of people in one night and still feel completely alone. The city sees a passenger occupying a seat. It may not see the eviction notice, the hospital discharge, the lost job, the untreated illness, or the family relationship that broke before the person came underground. And when morning rush hour begins, the temporary shelter disappears. The trains fill, the platforms tighten. The The same person who was nearly invisible at 3 in the morning suddenly becomes an obstacle at 8. Pressure rises on transit workers. Riders feel unsafe. Police are called. Outreach teams arrive. The person is asked to leave the train, enter a shelter, or move somewhere else. But somewhere else is often the problem. A shelter bed may not be available immediately. A person may distrust the intake process. Someone may fear losing a partner, a pet, or the few belongings they still own. So the cycle begins again, out of the station, back onto the sidewalk. Then when night returns, back underground. The subway was never meant to become a bedroom, but in a city where private space is expensive and public space is constantly controlled, a moving train can become the last place where a person is allowed to sit, close their eyes, and disappear for a few stops. Behind the visible street crisis is another New York that is easier to miss. It exists behind shelter doors, inside temporary hotel rooms, and in crowded spaces where families try to create a normal evening without knowing how long they will stay. A child may sleep up for school. A parent may still pack a lunch, find clean clothes, and check the time for a subway connection. From the outside, the routine can look ordinary, but nothing about it feels stable. The room may not feel like home. Privacy may be limited. Neighbors change. Rules change. A family can be moved with little warning, forcing children to learn a new route, a new neighborhood, and sometimes a new school. Parents often try to hide the fear. They speak quietly after the children fall asleep. They count what remains in a bank account. They search rental listings they cannot afford. They wait for phone calls that may decide where the family sleeps next week. Homelessness does not always look like someone lying on a sidewalk. Sometimes it looks like a child carrying a backpack out of a shelter before sunrise. Sometimes it looks like a mother keeping every important document in one folder because losing it could delay housing for months. Sometimes it looks like a father taking 2 trains to work, then returning to a room where he cannot promise how long the family will remain. The pressure changes every part of family life. Children may become quieter at school. They may avoid inviting friends anywhere. They may learn not to answer simple questions about where they live. Parents carry the shame of a crisis they may not have caused. A rent increase, lost job, medical emergency, family separation, or one missed payment can push a household into a system that is difficult to leave. Once inside, the goal is not only to find housing, it is to preserve the feeling that the family is still a family. Dinner still matters. Homework still matters. A birthday still matters. A child still needs to believe that the adults know what happens next, even when they do not. This is why the shelter crisis can remain hidden in plain sight. The children ride the same trains. The parents stand in the same grocery lines. They pass through the same streets as everyone else. They are not outside every night, but they are still living without the one thing most people use to organize the rest of life: a permanent place to return to. And for many families, the distance between temporary shelter and a real home is not measured only in miles. It is measured in waiting lists, unanswered calls, rejected applications, rising rent, and the quiet fear that temporary may last far longer than anyone expected. In New York, homelessness often begins long before someone reaches a shelter or sleeps on a train. It begins with a rent notice, a missed paycheck, a medical bill, a landlord saying the lease will not be renewed. For many people, there is no dramatic moment when life suddenly collapses. There is only a slow narrowing of choices. First, the savings disappear. Then the credit cards fill. A parent borrows from family. A worker takes extra shifts. Someone stops buying medication, skips meals, or ignores a utility bill just to keep the apartment for one more month. From the outside, the household may still appear stable. The children still go to school. The adults still go to work. The lights are still on. But every envelope under the door feels heavier. Every unknown phone number creates fear. And every night begins with the same calculation. What can be delayed? What can be sold? and who might still be willing to help. In a city where rent can consume most of a paycheck, one disruption can become impossible to absorb. A job loss does not only remove income, it can also remove health insurance, transportation money, and the ability to meet the next deposit. A family separation can turn one household into two. An illness can make someone miss work just long enough to fall behind. By the time an eviction becomes visible, the crisis may have been growing quietly for months. Then comes the day the key no longer works. Furniture is left behind or moved into storage that may soon become unaffordable. Important documents are packed quickly. Clothes are forced into bags. Someone calls every relative they know, trying to avoid saying the word homeless. The first night outside is often not spent on a sidewalk. It may be spent in a car on a friend's floor, inside a 24-hour waiting room, or riding the subway until morning. That temporary solution can create the illusion that the crisis has been avoided. But each night without a permanent place makes the next step harder. Sleep disappears. Work performance suffers. Children lose routine. Belongings are scattered across different places. A missed appointment leads to another delay. And the person who once needed help with rent now needs help with housing, transportation documents, childcare, storage, and recovery from the shock of losing everything familiar. This is how the distance back grows. Not because people stop wanting stability, but because instability begins charging interest. Every day without a home creates another problem that must be solved before a home becomes possible again. And in New York, where millions of people live only one emergency away from falling behind the line between housed and homeless, may be thinner than it appears. For some people, losing housing is the beginning of the crisis. For others, it is the moment every other struggle becomes harder to hide. On the street, untreated mental illness can turn ordinary decisions into exhausting battles. A crowded shelter may feel threatening. A stranger offering help may sound dangerous. A simple appointment can become impossible to keep when fear, confusion, or paranoia controls the day. Addiction adds another layer. A person may begin using drugs to stay awake through a dangerous night, to numb pain, to escape trauma, or to quiet a mind that never feels safe. What begins as relief can quickly become another form of captivity. The body starts demanding the substance before it demands food. Withdrawal brings sickness, panic, and pain. A person may know exactly what the drug is taking from them and still feel unable to stop. From the outside, this can look like a refusal to change. From inside addiction, it can feel like surviving the next hour. The street then becomes both the cause of the suffering and the place where that suffering is managed. People gather near familiar corners because they know who has food, who has a blanket, who can warn them when police or sanitation crews arrive, and who might have the drug that keeps withdrawal away. These relationships can be dangerous, but they can also become the closest thing to community. That is one reason leaving is more complicated than simply accepting a bed. A shelter may mean separation from the only people who still recognize someone's name. Treatment may require trust that has already been broken many times. A hospital may stabilize a person for a few hours, then release them back into the same noise, the same fear, and the same uncertainty. Every return to the street makes the next promise of help harder to believe. Isolation grows quietly. Family members may stop answering calls after years of crisis. Friends disappear. A person who once had a job, an apartment, and a routine begins to be known only by the place where they sleep. Then shame takes over. They stop asking for help because rejection feels worse than hunger. They avoid eye contact because every look seems to carry judgment. They begin to believe that the city sees them as a problem before it sees them as a person. This is where homelessness becomes more than the absence of housing. It becomes the loss of identity. A person is no longer introduced by their work, their family, their humor, or the life they had before. They become the man on the platform, the woman near the station, the person everyone walks around. And once someone has been reduced to a location, it becomes easier for the rest of the city to forget that they are still trying to survive inside it. In New York, people learn to keep moving. They step around trash bags, construction barriers, crowded sidewalks, and bodies sleeping near subway entrances. At first, someone lying beneath a blanket may feel impossible to ignore. Then the same person appears the next morning, and the morning after that. Eventually, the extraordinary becomes part of the background. Commuters look at their phones. Tourists check directions. Parents pull children closer. Store owners unlock their doors and prepare for another day. Most are not cruel. Many are tired, afraid, or unsure what help would actually mean. A person shouting on a platform can feel unpredictable. Someone asleep inside a doorway can block a business. Needles, human waste, or open drug use can make an entire block feel unsafe. Residents begin asking why public spaces no longer feel public. Workers wonder why they are expected to manage crises they were never trained to handle. Police are called to solve problems that cannot be solved with an arrest. Outreach teams return to people who have already refused help many times. And the person on the sidewalk becomes the center of an argument while rarely being included in it. One side sees suffering, another sees disorder. Both may be looking at the same scene. The conflict becomes sharper when camps are removed. For nearby residents, the sidewalk may finally feel usable again. A doorway becomes accessible. A park begins to look like a park. But for the people who were living there, removal does not automatically create housing. It may only scatter a small community across new corners, train stations, emergency rooms, and neighborhoods. The street looks cleaner. The crisis becomes harder to see. That is one of the most difficult truths about homelessness in a crowded city. Visibility creates anger. Invisibility creates neglect. When people remain in public, residents demand action. When they are moved somewhere else, the city may appear to improve, even though the suffering continues beyond the next block. New Yorkers become experts at looking forward because stopping can feel overwhelming. But every person being passed once had a name people called with affection. They had routines, private jokes, favorite foods, unfinished plans, and someone who expected them to come home. The danger is not only that the city stops seeing them, it is that after being ignored for long enough, they may begin to stop seeing themselves. Help exists across New York. There are shelters, outreach workers, food programs, medical teams, and people who return to the same corners night after night, hoping that one conversation will finally lead somewhere safer. But offering help is not the same as making escape possible. A shelter bed may solve tonight without solving next month. A hospital can treat an immediate crisis, then discharge someone back to the street. A housing application may require identification, appointments, phone calls, and documents that are difficult to protect while moving between trains, shelters, and sidewalks. Even when a person is ready, the system may not be ready at the same moment. One missed appointment can mean another delay. One lost phone can break contact with a caseworker. One relapse can close a program door just when stability was beginning to feel possible. Progress rarely happens in a straight line. Someone may accept shelter leave return, disappear, and ask for help again months later. To an exhausted worker, it can look like failure. To the person outside, it may be the slow process of learning to trust another promise. The people doing this work cannot force hope into someone. They can offer a meal, a ride, a bed, medical care, or another chance. But rebuilding a life requires more than removing a person from public view. It requires somewhere safe enough to sleep long enough to recover and stable enough to imagine a future beyond the next night. Until that exists, help may continue arriving, one conversation at a time, while the crisis keeps moving from one corner of New York to another. By sunrise, New York begins again. The trains fill. Storefronts open. Coffee is poured. Millions of people move toward work, school, appointments, and homes they expect to return to later that night. For someone without that certainty, morning does not feel like a new beginning. It is simply the next shift in survival. The bench that offered a few hours of rest is needed by commuters. The doorway must be cleared. The train becomes crowded. The corner that felt quiet before dawn becomes visible again. And once more, the person carrying everything they own is asked to move. New York is one of the most crowded places on earth. Yet homelessness can create a loneliness so complete that a person may pass thousands of faces without being truly seen by anyone. That may be the deepest contradiction of this city. A person can be surrounded by light, movement, money, opportunity, and human contact, and still have nowhere that feels safe enough to close their eyes. Tomorrow, the same arguments will continue. Residents will ask for cleaner and safer streets. Outreach workers will return with food transportation and another offer of shelter. Police and transit employees will be asked to manage crises that began far beyond a subway platform. And people without homes will continue making impossible choices between places that were never designed for them to live. Some will accept help. Some will walk away. Some will disappear into another station, another waiting room, or another crowded block. But none of them began life as part of the background. Before the bags, the shelters, the trains, and the sidewalks, there was a name, a family, a place where someone expected them to return. The city will keep moving. The question is whether it can move forward without leaving more people behind. If this story changed the way you see homelessness in New York, subscribe and share your thoughts below. Because sometimes the first step toward helping someone is simply refusing to look away. Disclaimer. This documentary is for educational and journalistic purposes only. It discusses homelessness, poverty, mental health, addiction-related issues, housing policy, and public spending. Composite characters are based on patterns from public records, housing research, shelter data, court filings, and published case studies. They are not intended to identify any specific private individual. This video does not promote illegal activity, drug use, harassment, or harmful behavior. Some footage has been edited or blurred for privacy, safety, and compliance with YouTube community guidelines.